the Apache woman was left to starving wolves, until her former husband came to save her Wild West. Aeon, an Apache woman with sharp eyes and a steady heart, moved carefully through the dry, dusty terrain. She was not alone, yet she felt a deep sense of unease. The group she traveled with had been her companions for days, but there was tension in the air, and she could feel the invisible thread of distrust weaving itself among them. Aeon's past had been filled with hardships, and she had learned early in life to watch every step, to read every glance, and to trust her instincts above all else. Today, those instincts screamed that something was wrong. Aeon's past was not easily forgotten. She remembered the days when she had lived with Torin, her former husband. Torin was a rugged frontiersman with a sharp mind and a restless spirit. They had shared moments of joy and laughter, but their life together had not been easy. There were fights, misunderstandings, and eventually betrayal. Torin had left her years ago under circumstances that still haunted her. She had felt abandoned, hurt, and angry. Yet deep inside, there remained a tiny ember of care, a memory of a man who had once stood by her side. That ember now flickered uneasily in her chest as she moved cautiously along the rough trail. The group had set out at dawn, hoping to cross a stretch of desert before the heat became unbearable. They were a small company of settlers, each carrying their supplies on horseback, their faces drawn tight with concentration and worry. The desert was harsh, unforgiving, and every step forward was a challenge. Aeon noticed the worried glances exchanged between some of the men. Whispers of trouble had been passing through the group for days, talk of bandits and wild animals. Aeon kept her ears open, listening, analyzing. She had learned that the Wild West was not a place for the weak or unprepared. Every decision could mean life or death. As the sun climbed higher, the temperature rose sharply. The sand underfoot burned and the horizon shimmered with heat. Aeon's mouth was dry, her throat parched, yet she pressed on. She kept a small leather water pouch close to her, taking tiny sips to conserve what little remained. Around her, the group seemed to falter. Some riders slowed, their horses tired and sweating. Others argued about the route, pointing in different directions, each convinced they knew the correct path. Aeon watched silently, her mind working faster than her lips could speak. She understood that survival required clarity, not panic. Suddenly, a sound split the tense air, a series of shouts from the front of the group. Aeon's heart jumped into her throat. She urged her horse forward, galloping to see what had happened. As she approached, the sight that greeted her made her blood run cold. A band of armed men had appeared over a nearby ridge, riding fast, their intentions clear. The settlers were unprepared. Some tried to draw weapons, others froze in fear. Chaos erupted. Horses reared, men shouted, and the wind carried the sharp scent of dust and danger. Aeon acted quickly. She had been trained in the ways of survival and combat by her people, and though she preferred peace, she knew when action was necessary. She helped push a fallen rider out of the way, pulling him to safety before turning her attention to her own survival. The attackers were fast, skilled, and without mercy. In the confusion, the group scattered. Aeon found herself separated from the others, the sound of shouts and gunfire fading as she pushed deeper into the desert. Her heart pounded, but her mind was sharp. She had survived before, and she would survive again. As she ran, Aeon felt a mixture of fear and determination. She had been abandoned before, by Torin and by life itself, but she refused to let it happen again. The desert stretched endlessly before her, a vast ocean of sand and rock. She knew she would need water, food, and shelter if she were to survive the coming night. She remembered the lessons her mother had taught her as a child: how to find edible plants, how to read the tracks of animals, and how to find hidden sources of water. Those lessons were now her lifeline. Hours passed, and the sun rose higher, beating down with relentless heat. Aeon trudged through the sand, her muscles aching, her throat dry. She found a small depression in the desert, a place where the wind had created a natural shelter. There, she rested briefly, scanning the horizon for any signs of danger. In the distance, she could see movement, shapes that looked like wolves, their eyes glinting in the sunlight. Her heart clenched. Wolves were dangerous, especially in the harsh desert, where food was scarce and hunger made even the most cautious animals bold. Aeon remembered stories from her people about wolves, about how they hunted, how they respected strength and cunning. She knew she would have to be smart, careful, and quick. She gathered small stones, sticks, and anything she could use to defend herself. Her mind raced with strategies, imagining how she could scare the wolves off or at least survive until nightfall. She also thought of Torin. The memory of him brought both pain and a strange sense of hope. Would he ever come back for her? Would he even know she was in danger? She pushed the thought aside for now. Survival came first. Night fell, and with it came a biting cold. Aeon built a small fire from dried brush, the flames flickering against the dark sky. The wolves were still out there, their eyes reflecting the firelight as they circled, waiting. Aeon sat close to the fire, holding a makeshift spear, her ears straining for the slightest sound. She remembered her mother's words, "Fear is natural, but it must never control you." She breathed deeply, forcing herself to remain calm. Every shadow could hide danger, every sound could mean life or death. Sleep was impossible. Aeon stayed alert, listening to the desert night. The wolves moved closer, their hunger evident, their low growls echoing in the still air. Aeon's muscles tensed. She knew she could not run forever, nor could she fight them all at once. She would have to outsmart them, to use every bit of knowledge and skill she possessed. She thought of the desert itself as an ally, of the rocks and dunes as tools for her survival. Every instinct she had honed over a lifetime was now in use. By morning, Aeon had survived the night, though barely. The fire had dwindled and the wolves had retreated, at least for now. She felt a mix of exhaustion, relief, and determination. She knew that her journey was far from over. The desert was still dangerous, the settlers were gone, and the memory of betrayal weighed heavily on her heart. Yet there was also a sense of clarity. She was alive, and that meant she still had a chance. A chance to survive, to reclaim her strength, and perhaps one day to face her past. Aeon rose with the sun, her body aching but her spirit unbroken. She knew that the desert would test her again, that dangers both human and wild awaited. But she also knew that she was ready. She was not the same woman who had been abandoned. She was stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. With each step, she moved forward, guided by instinct, courage, and the faint hope that someone, perhaps Torin, might come to find her. And so, the journey began, a journey through a land of danger and beauty, of betrayal and courage, where the line between life and death was razor-thin, and where one woman's will to survive would be tested like never before. The morning sun rose slowly over the endless desert, casting long shadows across the sand and rocks. Aeon, though exhausted from the previous day, pushed herself forward. Her muscles ached, her lips were cracked, and her stomach growled in protest, but she refused to give in. She knew that survival depended on constant movement and sharp thinking. The desert was beautiful in its quiet way, but it was also unforgiving, and she had to respect it if she wanted to live. Aeon paused at the edge of a small canyon. The shadowed walls offered some relief from the sun, and she decided to rest for a short while. She drank sparingly from the last of her water pouch, feeling every drop slide down her throat like a precious gift. Hunger gnawed at her, but she focused on the tasks at hand. First, she needed shelter from the heat. Second, she needed a plan for food. The desert did not forgive mistakes, and Aeon had learned that one misstep could mean death. Her thoughts drifted for a moment to Torin. She remembered how he used to laugh when they rode together on horseback, the wind in their hair, the world stretching endlessly before them. And she remembered the day he left, The cold words, the sudden absence, the feeling of being abandoned when she needed him most. That memory burned like fire, yet beneath the anger was a small, reluctant hope. Could he still care for her? Could he come back if he knew she was in danger? She shook her head, pushing the thought aside. There was no time for longing, only survival. Aeon searched the canyon floor for any signs of water or edible plants. The desert was harsh, but it was not entirely barren. She found small bushes with bitter leaves, roots that could be chewed, and a few insects that could be eaten if necessary. She collected everything she could, arranging it carefully in a small satchel. Then, with a deep breath, she climbed higher up the canyon walls to scout the surrounding area. From above, she could see the endless expanse of sand, broken occasionally by jagged rocks and the faint tracks of animals. It was then she noticed them, wolves. A small pack moved silently across the dunes in the distance, their eyes glinting like dark jewels in the sunlight. Aeon's heart clenched. She had faced dangers before, but wolves were cunning and they were starving. Hunger made them bold, and boldness made them dangerous. She observed them carefully, noting their patterns, their movements, the way they communicated without words. Her people had always respected wolves, seeing them as both rivals and teachers. Aeon understood that survival would require the same combination of respect, intelligence, and caution. As the day wore on, the heat became nearly unbearable. Aeon used every trick she had learned to conserve energy. She rested in the shadows of rocks, shaded herself with her cloak, and moved slowly but deliberately across the desert. She avoided open areas where the wolves might see her, and she made careful calculations about which direction to take. Each decision was critical. One wrong move could bring her face to face with death. Despite her focus, hunger gnawed at her relentlessly. She had caught glimpses of small animals, rabbits, and lizards, but catching them without tools was difficult. She remembered how her mother had taught her to use simple traps and clever tricks to catch food. She set a small snare using a piece of string she had carried, hiding it carefully among rocks. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the distant howls of the wolves and the whisper of the desert wind. Patience, she reminded herself, was as important as skill. Night fell again, bringing a cold so sharp it cut through her thin cloak. Aeon built another small fire, careful to keep it low so it wouldn't attract unwanted attention. The wolves were still near, their eyes reflecting the faint glow of the flames as they circled at a safe distance. She tightened her grip on her spear, listening to every sound. The desert night was alive with noise, the scurrying of small animals, the distant calls of birds, and the low, threatening growls of predators. Aeon stayed alert, knowing that a single moment of carelessness could cost her life. During the long night, Aeon thought of her family, her tribe, and the lessons that had shaped her. She remembered how her mother had told her stories of survival, of courage, and of the importance of understanding the world around her. Wolves were a test, her mother had said, a reminder that life demanded both respect and cunning. Aeon felt a strange connection with the animals stalking her from the shadows. She understood their hunger, their struggle, and in that understanding she found a measure of calm. The following morning, Aeon discovered that her snare had caught a small rabbit. Relief flooded through her as she prepared a simple meal over her small fire. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, knowing that each piece of nourishment strengthened her body and sharpened her mind. Her confidence grew, though she knew she could not let it lead to carelessness. Survival was a constant balance between hope and vigilance. As she continued her journey, Aeon noticed other signs of life in the desert, tracks of deer, birds perched on rocks, and even the faint smell of water from a hidden stream. Each discovery brought hope, each challenge sharpened her instincts. She used rocks and natural formations to create barriers, making it harder for predators to approach unnoticed. She moved with a quiet grace, careful to leave minimal traces of her passage. The desert demanded respect, and Aeon was learning to earn it with every careful step. Days passed, blending together in a rhythm of movement, rest, and vigilance. The wolves remained a constant presence, circling and observing, testing her patience and skill. Aeon grew stronger with each encounter, learning to predict their movements, to anticipate their attacks, and to use the desert itself as a shield. She discovered small caves and overhangs that offered protection from both the elements and the predators. She collected edible plants and drank from hidden springs, each act of survival reinforcing her determination. Through it all, her thoughts occasionally drifted back to Torin. She wondered where he was, what he was doing, and whether he remembered her at all. The memory of his betrayal was still painful, but it no longer consumed her. Now it served as a reminder of her own strength, her ability to endure and survive against impossible odds. She realized that she was not merely surviving the desert. She was mastering it, learning its secrets, and becoming part of its harsh, beautiful rhythm. One night, as she settled into a small canyon for shelter, she noticed the wolves approaching more closely than before. They had grown bolder, hungrier, more desperate. Aeon did not panic. She had learned to read their movements, their intentions. She arranged rocks to create barriers, made a small trap, and prepared her spear carefully. She understood that the confrontation might come sooner than expected, and she needed to be ready. Her heart pounded, but her mind was clear. Survival demanded courage, focus, and the willingness to face fear without hesitation. The wolves circled, their eyes gleaming in the moonlight, growling softly, testing her defenses. Aeon stood her ground, moving with quiet precision, every action deliberate. She understood that the battle was not just physical. It was a test of will, intelligence, and courage. Hours passed in this tense standoff, and slowly the wolves retreated, discouraged by her skill and persistence. Aeon allowed herself a quiet sigh of relief. She had survived another night, another test, and she knew that the desert had begun to respect her determination. By dawn, Aeon was ready to move again. She had learned more about the desert, about the wolves, and about her own inner strength than she had ever known. Every step forward was both a victory and a lesson. She felt a growing sense of confidence, a belief that she could survive not just by chance, but by skill, intelligence, and courage. The desert was still dangerous, the wolves were still near, but Aeon was no longer afraid. She had faced death, hunger, and isolation, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. As the sun climbed high once more, Aeon continued her journey across the desert. Her eyes were sharp, her senses alert, and her heart steady. She knew that dangers lay ahead, that the wolves would return, and that the desert held many more challenges. But she also knew that she had the strength to face them, that she had the courage to endure, and that she had the skill to survive. The wilderness was harsh, but Aeon was learning to turn it to her advantage, becoming a master of her own fate in a world where survival was never guaranteed. And in the distance, though she did not yet know it, someone was beginning a journey of their own, a journey that would lead them to her, testing both past bonds and present courage in a world where life was fragile and every moment counted. The morning air in the small settlement was quiet but tense, a stark contrast to the chaos that had erupted in the desert days ago. Torin, rugged and weathered from years of wandering the Wild West, leaned against the wooden post of a small trading shack. His eyes scanned the horizon, restless and sharp. Rumors had begun to circulate among the settlers, whispers of a lone woman surviving in the desert, left to fend for herself against starvation and wolves. At first, Torin dismissed the stories. He told himself that they were just exaggerations, tales to entertain or frighten. But deep down, a cold weight of worry settled in his chest. He knew, without a doubt, that the woman the settlers spoke of was Aeon. Torin's memories of Aeon were vivid, replaying in his mind like old, bittersweet photographs. He remembered the firelight in her eyes, the way her hands moved with quiet grace, and the warmth of her laughter on days when the desert seemed less cruel. And he remembered the last day he saw her, how he had walked away in silence, leaving behind love, anger, and unanswered questions. The guilt that had shadowed him for years now pressed against him with a weight he could no longer ignore. He could no longer stay idle. Aeon needed him, and this time he could not fail. The first step was preparation. Torin gathered supplies from the trading post: dried meat, water skins, a sturdy rope, a few basic tools, and a small pistol for defense. He checked every item meticulously. The desert would not forgive mistakes, and he had no intention of returning empty-handed. As he loaded his horse, he felt the familiar mixture of fear and determination. Every mile he would travel was dangerous. Bandits, wild animals, and the harsh elements awaited, but he was determined to reach her, to make things right, and perhaps to find some measure of redemption for the mistakes of his past. The journey began in the late morning, the sun climbing high above the dusty horizon. Torin moved cautiously, following the same trail Aeon had likely taken. He scanned every ridge, every valley, searching for signs of her passage. The desert was silent in its vastness, yet full of subtle clues: the tracks of horses, the marks of a passing traveler, the faint impressions of bare feet in soft sand. Torin's instincts were sharp. He had survived this land before, and he knew how to read its hidden language. As the hours passed, the desert grew more unforgiving. The heat shimmered off the sand, and the air seemed heavy with tension. Torin's horse grew weary, its hooves sinking into soft patches of sand. Yet he pressed forward, knowing that time was critical. Aeon's survival depended on speed and precision. He thought of her alone in the wilderness, facing wolves, hunger, and isolation. His heart ached at the thought. He had left her once, but he would not leave her again. Not now, not ever. Along the way, Torin encountered signs of danger: broken branches, paw prints too large to belong to a coyote, and the distant howl of wolves reminded him that the desert was never empty. He moved with caution, keeping his horse close to the rocks and shaded areas. At one point, he spotted a small fire smoldering in a canyon below, a sign that someone had been there recently. His pulse quickened. Could it be Aeon? He dismounted and approached quietly, scanning the surrounding area. The fire was cold, long abandoned, but it confirmed his suspicions. She had been nearby, and she was alive. Night began to fall, painting the desert in deep purples and blues. Torin knew he had to make camp but could not rest fully. He was too close to Aeon to risk slowing down. He tied his horse near a rock formation for shelter and began a quiet vigil, listening to the desert night. The wind carried distant sounds: the soft rustle of leaves, the scurrying of small animals, and the low, haunting howls of wolves. Torin's hand rested on his pistol, his senses sharp. He had faced many dangers before, but the thought of finding Aeon alive drove him with renewed strength. As darkness deepened, Torin reflected on his past mistakes. He had left her, yes, but he had also learned. The years apart had taught him humility, patience, and the importance of taking responsibility. He understood now that courage was not just about fighting danger. It was about standing up when it mattered most, about facing fears and protecting those who could not protect themselves. His journey to find Aeon was more than a rescue. It was a chance to atone, to make things right, and to prove that even in a harsh world, loyalty and love could endure. The next morning, Torin resumed his journey with renewed focus. The sun rose like a blazing fire, casting long shadows across the dunes. He spotted tracks, bare footprints mingled with paw prints, and his heart leapt. Aeon was near. He followed the trail carefully, mindful of each step. The desert challenged him constantly, with soft sand that slowed his horse and sharp rocks that threatened to injure it. Yet he pressed on, his determination unwavering. The thought of Aeon, alone and in danger, fueled his strength. By midday, he reached a rocky ridge overlooking a small canyon. From this vantage point, he could see the subtle signs of life: a carefully built shelter, the remains of a small fire, and the faint outline of someone moving in the distance. Torin's heart raced. It was her, Aeon. Alive and still fighting. He felt a surge of relief, but he knew the danger was far from over. The wolves were likely nearby, and the terrain itself was treacherous. He would have to approach carefully, using both skill and cunning to reach her safely. As he descended into the canyon, Torin's mind worked quickly. He thought about the wolves, about how to distract them, about how to move quietly without alerting them. He prepared traps and made sure his horse was secured, ready to act at a moment's notice. Every detail mattered. Every choice could mean life or death. He moved like a shadow, silent and deliberate, his eyes scanning for any sign of immediate danger. The desert had taught him patience, and now it would test his courage. Hours passed, and the sun began to dip toward the horizon. Torin was close now. He could see Aeon more clearly. She was moving with careful precision, carrying small supplies, her eyes alert to the surrounding desert. She had grown stronger, sharper, more capable than he remembered. Yet he knew she was still in danger. The wolves had been relentless, and he could see the faint traces of their tracks nearby. Torin steeled himself. This would be no simple reunion. It would be a confrontation with danger, a test of skill, and perhaps a test of the bond they once shared. As he drew closer, Aeon noticed movement in the shadows. Her hand went instinctively to her spear, her eyes scanning for danger. She saw him then, Torin, moving with careful determination, a look of intensity in his eyes. Relief washed over her, but so did caution. Trust had been broken before, and survival had taught her to be careful. Yet she recognized him immediately. Her heart skipped a beat. He had come for her. After all these years, after all the desert and wolves and fear, he had come. Torin called out softly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "Aeon, it's me. I've come to take you home." Aeon studied him for a moment, weighing the truth in his eyes against the memories of the past. Slowly, she lowered her spear, though her muscles remained tense. She had survived the desert, but now another challenge awaited, trusting him again, following him through danger, and facing whatever lay ahead. The wolves were near, their presence a constant reminder that the desert was never truly safe. Torin and Aeon moved together, silent and careful, each step measured, each glance alert. The bond between them, though strained, began to reform, strengthened by mutual respect, shared danger, and the instinctive knowledge that they were stronger together. The journey back through the desert would be long and perilous, but for the first time in days, they were not alone. As night fell, they found temporary shelter in a small canyon, protected from the open desert. Torin tended to Aeon's minor wounds, and together they prepared a small fire. The wolves howled in the distance, but the immediate danger had passed. They ate sparingly, conserving their strength, and spoke in quiet tones. Words were not needed to convey the understanding between them: shared survival, shared respect, and the hope that they could face whatever the desert still had in store. By dawn, they would continue their journey, facing new challenges and the threat of the wolves, the harsh sun, and the unforgiving terrain. But for now, Torin and Aeon had found each other again. In a world of danger and betrayal, they had discovered a fragile, precious connection, one that might just give them the strength to survive, and perhaps to heal the wounds of the past. The desert stretched endlessly under the bright morning sun, its golden sand shimmering like waves in an ocean of heat. Aeon and Torin moved cautiously through the rocky canyon, their steps deliberate, their eyes scanning for danger. The wolves were still near, their distant howls a constant reminder that the wilderness was unforgiving. Aeon carried her spear tightly, muscles tense, ready for anything. Torin walked beside her, alert and watchful, his hand never far from his pistol. Both knew that even a small misstep could turn the day into disaster. As they descended a narrow ridge, Aeon caught sight of movement in the distance. Her heart skipped a beat. The wolf pack was closer than ever. She could see the glint of their eyes and the way their bodies moved silently over the dunes, circling and assessing. Hunger had made them bold, and boldness made them dangerous. Aeon tightened her grip on her spear and whispered to Torin, "They're close, very close." Torin nodded, his jaw set. He had faced wolves before, but never with someone he cared for at stake. He knew this was a test of both strength and strategy. They moved together, keeping low, using the natural formations of the canyon as cover. Aeon remembered the lessons her mother had taught her long ago: how to read animal behavior, how to predict their movements, and how to use the environment to your advantage. Torin, though less familiar with the subtle signals of wolves, relied on his experience in the wilderness, his instincts honed from years of survival in the harsh West. The two of them moved as one, silent and careful, aware that the slightest sound could draw the wolves closer. Suddenly, a wolf lunged from behind a boulder, teeth bared, eyes wild with hunger. Aeon reacted instinctively, planting her spear firmly in the ground and swinging it in a precise arc to defend herself. The wolf yelped and retreated, startled by her courage and skill. Torin fired a warning shot into the air, the sharp crack echoing through the canyon. The remaining wolves hesitated, watching, calculating. They were clever, but they were no match for two determined humans who had survived the desert's harshest tests. The moment of confrontation was tense and electrifying. The wolves circled, trying to find an opening, but Aeon and Torin were ready. They used rocks, branches, and the uneven terrain to their advantage. Every movement was calculated, every action deliberate. Aeon noticed the smallest details, the way the wolves' ears flicked, the way their tails twitched, and used that knowledge to anticipate attacks. Torin covered her flank, moving swiftly, protecting her from the wolves that tried to sneak around the sides. Together, they were a formidable team, a force the pack had never expected to face. Hours passed in this careful dance of survival. The sun climbed higher, beating down on them relentlessly, but neither Aeon nor Torin allowed fatigue to cloud their judgment. They understood the wolves' patterns, predicting their movements, and using them to guide their own path through the canyon. Aeon set small traps using rocks and sticks, creating obstacles that slowed the wolves and gave them a critical advantage. Torin kept watch from higher ground, his eyes sharp, scanning for any sign of the pack attempting to flank them. Finally, the wolves seemed to grow frustrated, realizing that these humans were not easy prey. They retreated to a distance, their eyes still fixed on Aeon and Torin, their growls warning of future threats. Aeon exhaled deeply, her body trembling from the adrenaline, but her spirit was stronger than ever. She looked at Torin, who gave a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of their shared triumph. For a brief moment, the desert seemed to pause, as if respecting their courage, their determination, and the bond that had brought them together once more. With the immediate danger behind them, Torin suggested they move quickly before the wolves regrouped. He led Aeon along a hidden path, one that wound through narrow rock formations and provided natural cover. Aeon followed, her steps sure and confident, no longer just reacting but moving with intention. She had survived alone in the desert, but now, together with Torin, their chances of reaching safety had greatly increased. Every step forward was a victory, every careful movement a testament to her strength and resilience. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the canyon floor, Aeon and Torin reached a small plateau overlooking a hidden valley. It was a rare oasis in the desert, a small spring fed by underground water, surrounded by shrubs and rocks that offered both food and shelter. Aeon's eyes brightened with relief. Here, they could rest, replenish their strength, and prepare for the final leg of their journey. Torin helped her down to the spring, offering water and dried meat from his pack. For the first time in days, Aeon allowed herself to feel a sense of safety, a fragile peace in the midst of danger. As they rested, the emotional weight of their journey began to surface. Torin looked at Aeon, his eyes filled with both sorrow and hope. "I should have come back sooner," he said quietly. "I should have never left you alone." Aeon studied him for a moment, her own emotions a mix of anger, relief, and lingering care. She had survived without him, yes, but his arrival now was more than a rescue. It was proof that he still cared, that he was willing to face danger for her. Slowly she nodded, acknowledging the gesture without yet forgiving the past. Trust, she knew, would take time. Night fell over the desert, and the oasis became their sanctuary. They built a small fire, keeping it low to avoid attracting unwanted attention from predators. The wolves were still near, but they seemed hesitant now, as if sensing that Aeon and Torin were no ordinary prey. Around the fire, they shared small stories of the past, of lessons learned in the wilderness, and of moments that had shaped them into the people they were today. Despite the danger, there was a sense of connection, a quiet understanding that their survival depended on each other as much as on their skills. The next morning, they prepared to continue their journey. The desert was still vast and dangerous, and the wolves remained a threat, but Aeon and Torin were no longer just individuals struggling alone. They were a team, united by necessity, courage, and the beginnings of reconciliation. Torin checked their supplies, securing water, food, and tools, while Aeon planned their route carefully, using her knowledge of the land to avoid open areas where the wolves might attack. Every step forward required vigilance, skill, and courage. As they moved through the canyon, the desert seemed to challenge them at every turn. Soft sand threatened to slow their progress, jagged rocks tested their footing, and the constant heat drained their energy. Yet Aeon and Torin pressed on, relying on each other's strengths. Aeon's knowledge of the desert guided them through safe passages, while Torin's physical strength helped clear obstacles and protect against potential threats. Together, they were stronger than either had been alone. In the distance, they finally saw the edges of the settlement that Aeon had been traveling from days ago. Relief washed over them, but they knew that their journey was not yet complete. The wolves were still out there, and the desert still held dangers they could not yet see. Yet the bond between Aeon and Torin had been renewed through shared struggle, courage, and determination. They had faced starvation, isolation, and predators, and they had survived. That survival was not just physical, it was emotional, a testament to their resilience, trust, and the human spirit. As they approached the settlement, Aeon looked at Torin, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and cautious hope. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for coming back. For not giving up." Torin smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and determination on his face. "I promised I would," he replied. "And I always keep my promises." For the first time in a long while, Aeon felt the weight of fear lift slightly, replaced by the fragile comfort of safety and companionship. They entered the settlement carefully, alert to every sound and movement, aware that danger could still be near. But the town was quiet, the people busy with daily life, unaware of the ordeal that had unfolded in the desert just beyond. Aeon and Torin moved through the streets, heads high, their presence commanding quiet respect. The story of their survival, though not yet known to others, was etched into their very beings, a tale of courage, resilience, and the power of determination. By the end of the day, they found a small home where they could rest properly, tending to minor injuries and sharing a simple meal. The desert and the wolves had tested them both, but the experience had strengthened their bond and renewed their sense of purpose. They had survived not just the wilderness, but the fears, doubts, and regrets that had haunted them. And now, together, they could face whatever lay ahead, knowing that survival was possible even in the harshest of worlds, and that courage, trust, and determination could carry them through the darkest moments. The settlement was quiet in the early morning, the sun casting soft. golden light over the dusty streets. Aeon and Torin had spent the night in a small home at the edge of town, finally able to rest without fear of wolves or the harsh desert sun. Yet the events of the past days weighed heavily on both of them. The desert had tested their strength, courage, and will to survive. Now, in the calm of civilization, they began to reflect on the journey, the danger, and the fragile bond that had brought them together once more. Aeon looked around the modest home, noticing the small comforts she had not realized she missed until now: clean water, soft bedding, and the quiet hum of people going about their daily lives. She felt a mixture of relief and awe. The desert had taught her resilience, patience, and ingenuity, but the settlement reminded her of the safety and connection she had longed for. Yet even here, she knew the lessons of the wilderness would stay with her forever. The world was unforgiving, but she had learned to face it with courage. Torin was equally reflective, sitting by the small fire as he cleaned and checked their supplies. The past haunted him: the day he left Aeon, the years of wandering, the memories of mistakes he could never undo. But now, seeing her alive, seeing her strength, and knowing that he had helped save her, he felt a quiet sense of redemption. He understood that survival was not just about enduring danger. It was about taking responsibility, protecting those who could not protect themselves, and honoring promises. This journey had been about more than rescuing Aeon. It had been about facing his own past and becoming a better man. Once their minor injuries were tended to, Aeon and Torin ventured into the town. Settlers paused as they walked past, sensing something different about them. There was a quiet strength in Aeon's posture, a determination in Torin's gaze. They were survivors, shaped by the desert and the trials it had thrown at them. Children watched with wide eyes, women whispered about their courage, and men nodded with respect. Though the story of their journey had not yet been told, their presence alone spoke volumes. Life in the Wild West was difficult, and those who could survive its challenges were admired by all. Aeon and Torin went to the trading post to gather supplies for their next days. They moved carefully, aware that even in the safety of the settlement, life was unpredictable. Aeon's mind was sharp, noting details, learning new ways to survive even in town. Torin, walking beside her, remained alert, his senses attuned to potential danger. They had learned to rely on each other, combining skill, courage, and instinct to face the unknown. The journey through the desert had forged a bond that words alone could not describe, a bond born from survival, respect, and the recognition of each other's strength. As the day progressed, Aeon began to feel the weight of emotion she had suppressed for so long. She thought of the desert nights, the hunger, the wolves, and the countless moments she had faced fear alone. She realized how much she had grown, how much stronger she had become. Yet she also recognized the importance of connection, of having someone she could trust completely. Torin had returned when she needed him most, proving that loyalty and love could endure even after years of absence. Her heart, once heavy with pain, now held a cautious hope. Torin, too, was changed. He had faced not only the dangers of the desert but the consequences of his past choices. Seeing Aeon survive on her own had filled him with awe, and yet the act of rescuing her had brought a sense of purpose he had longed for. He understood that redemption was not just about words, it was about actions, courage, and commitment. By standing by her side, protecting her, and facing the wilderness together, he had taken a step toward making amends. The journey had tested him as much as it had tested her, shaping him into a man who could face challenges with integrity and care. In the following days, Aeon and Torin helped the settlement in small but meaningful ways. They shared their knowledge of survival, teaching others how to find water, create traps, and navigate the desert safely. Aeon spoke of wolves and wildlife, showing respect for nature while explaining how to protect oneself. Torin taught tracking, defense, and the importance of vigilance in the wilderness. The settlers listened, inspired by their courage and skill, recognizing that their experience in the desert was not only a tale of survival but a lesson in resilience and wisdom. As they worked together, the bond between Aeon and Torin deepened. Trust, once broken, began to mend slowly. They learned to rely on each other again, sharing not just survival skills but laughter, conversation, and small moments of tenderness. The desert had stripped away superficial concerns, leaving only what mattered: courage, loyalty, and the willingness to stand together in the face of danger. Aeon found herself remembering the happier moments with Torin, not with pain, but with a recognition that the past could not be changed, but the future could be shaped by their actions. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Aeon and Torin walked to the edge of the settlement, overlooking the desert that had tested them so harshly. The wind was warm, carrying the scent of sand and shrubs. Aeon felt a quiet sense of closure, a connection to the land that had challenged her, frightened her, and ultimately strengthened her. She looked at Torin, seeing not just the man who had left her, but the man who had returned, who had faced danger to ensure her survival. In that moment, words were unnecessary. Their eyes met, sharing understanding, relief, and the promise of hope. The story of their journey began to spread through the settlement, inspiring admiration and respect. Children listened wide-eyed to tales of courage and survival, while adults nodded, reflecting on the harsh realities of life in the Wild West. Aeon and Torin did not seek recognition, but they understood that their experience could serve as an example. Life was fragile, danger was constant, but courage, intelligence, and loyalty could carry a person through even the darkest moments. Their survival was proof of that truth. In the days that followed, Aeon regained her full strength, her body and spirit rejuvenated by rest, food, and safety. She continued to explore the settlement and its surroundings, always alert, always prepared. The lessons of the desert remained with her: how to read the land, how to respect wildlife, and how to survive with courage and intelligence. Yet now she had the added comfort of companionship, a partner who had proven his loyalty and bravery. Torin was no longer just a figure from the past. He was a present ally, someone she could trust and rely upon. Torin, too, adjusted to life in the settlement. He continued to teach and share his knowledge, but he also reflected on his journey with Aeon. The desert had been a crucible, testing his courage, resilience, and willingness to face his own failures. By helping Aeon survive and guiding her back to safety, he had discovered a sense of purpose and redemption. He understood that life was not about avoiding mistakes but about facing them, learning from them, and striving to do better. Aeon's survival had become his own path to redemption, a testament to courage, loyalty, and the power of action. As time passed, Aeon and Torin continued to work together, blending their experiences into a shared life that balanced caution with hope. They never forgot the lessons of the desert, the hunger, the wolves, and the relentless challenges, but they also embraced the lessons of connection, trust, and resilience. Their bond, forged in danger and strengthened by survival, became a source of strength for both of them. The wilderness had tested them, but it had also taught them that together they could face anything. The desert, once a place of fear and danger, became a reminder of their strength, courage, and determination. Aeon reflected on her journey: the nights spent with wolves circling, the relentless sun, the search for food and water. She understood that survival was not simply about living. It was about learning, adapting, and finding strength within oneself. Torin's presence had transformed the journey from one of isolated struggle into a shared triumph. They had faced the harshest elements and emerged stronger, wiser, and more united than ever. Finally, one evening, as the sun painted the horizon in deep reds and oranges, Aeon and Torin stood together at the edge of the settlement, looking out over the desert that had shaped their lives. The memories of fear, hunger, and loneliness lingered, but they were tempered by triumph, resilience, and hope. The wolves, the harsh sun, and the challenges of the wilderness had tested them, but they had endured. Aelon's strength and Tauren's loyalty had combined to create a story of survival, courage, and redemption, a story that would remain with them forever. In the quiet of that moment, they understood something profound. The desert, though harsh and dangerous, had revealed the best within them. Aeon had discovered her resilience, her intelligence, and her courage. Tauren had found redemption, loyalty, and purpose. Together, they had faced death and emerged alive, stronger, and connected in ways that words could hardly capture. The journey was over, but the lessons of the desert would remain forever, guiding them through life, challenges, and the unpredictable wilderness of the world beyond.